with our next speaker. Professor Strenger is an existential psychoanalyst, philosopher, and public intellectual, and serves as professor of psychology and philosophy at the Cohn Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Ideas in the School of Psychological Sciences at Tel Aviv University. Strenger is a senior research fellow at the Center of Terrorism Studies at John Jay College, the Seminary of Existential Psychoanalysis in Zurich, on the Terrorism Monitoring Panel of the World Federation of Scientists and the Scientific Board of the Sigmund Freud Foundation in Vienna. Strenger has published numerous papers and books. His work has been reported on, and he has been interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Time magazine, as well as hundreds of newspapers and websites in more than 20 languages. As a publicist, he writes primarily on Israeli and European politics and the Middle Eastern conflict and cultural issues. He's a columnist at Israel's leading newspaper Haaretz and at Neue Zürcher Zeitung, and occasionally writes in the New York Times, The Guardian, Huffington Post, Foreign Policy, and other venues. Thank you very much.
I haven't done anything yet. Why are you thanking me? Good morning, everybody. First of all, let me tell you, how much time do I have? 30 minutes. That will be a short talk. I will waste.
The art of being short is a very important democratic skill.
I will talk about that in a minute. Let me first say that I'm always very happy to be at the Leer Institute, and I'm very grateful for the occasion to be here. It's one of the places that shaped me and my intellectual development, so it's always a great pleasure. What's less of a pleasure is I pretty much could identify with every word that Professor Schäfer said in his lecture, and I find myself traveling Europe constantly in conferences that are doubting what the future of democracy is. So something's really wrong, obviously, because otherwise people wouldn't be that pessimistic. Let me start with a personal little anecdote. I grew up in Switzerland, where I was and I used to be very proud of Switzerland's political culture, among other things because, as most of you know, it's probably the only really direct democracy in the world. My pride kind of was shattered to some extent when, as some of you may remember, a while ago, not many years ago, the largest party in Switzerland, SVP, the Schweizerische Volkspartei, initiated a referendum on the issue that it should no longer be allowed to build minarets in Switzerland. And they had a fabulous poster for that referendum, where you saw little Switzerland surrounded by minarets that basically looked like intercontinental rockets, that were going to crash and crush Switzerland. The referendum went through with 52.5% to 48.5%. Do any of you know how many minarets there were in Switzerland at that time when it was being crushed by those intercontinental rocket huge? Nobody knows? 3, ladies and gentlemen. 3. First anecdote. Second anecdote. Intellectuals generally have the luxury of. I'll keep my watch out there so I'll know. And then you'll keep pressuring me. So I know that trick when I. We intellectuals generally have the advantage of I would say, living in a world without friction. We talk about theoretical concepts and idealized conceptions, and I think one of the deepest learning experiences I had was when in 2003 the Labour Party in Israel asked me to be part of its strategy team. That was in the middle of the Second Intifada. We had one of the most decent people in Israel, I think, Amar Mitzna, leading the party. And our opponent was no more and no less than Arik Sharon. And I learned a hell of a lot in this and a few other experiences of doing practical politics, which is, and this is the topic I want to talk about today, which is that in the end, the practice of democracy is very different from our conceptions of it. Because in the end, as we know from research in political psychology, in the sociology of politics and and of course political science, what makes people tick are not arguments, but basic feelings. People vote primarily guided by their identities. They are guided by their loves, and even more by their hatreds. And I'm sorry to say I have gained some experience with that. Meanwhile, the art of political campaigning is about triggering love if you can, and since that is generally quite rather difficult, the most effective thing you can do is to trigger hatred. That works beautifully. I will, I think Professor Schäfer gave a very extensive view of the dangers and difficulties of democracy today. So I have kicked out, since now I know that I have half an hour, so I can kick out a large part of what I wanted to say, and I will limit myself to basically one question. If I look at what preoccupies most people in the conferences that I attend on this topic, and it so happens that I also have written quite a bit about it, it is the danger of populism. Populism in the sense that the great idea of plurality and of freedom of opinion is being undermined in a very deep sense when it turns out that opinions are less and less reasoned opinions. And again, when I talk about my experiences and the experience of anybody, who, of course, who does actual political campaigning, the frustrating thing is that it has so little to do with the deliberative process that, in a sense, was the basic idea behind democracy. I want to remind you that Francis Fukuyama, in his latest magnum opus, The Origins of Political Order, said that one of the advantages of democracy is supposed to be, that government is accountable to the people. That we are supposed to have the luxury of saying every 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, depending where you live. If it's in Italy, it's every year, more or less. Whether you think that government has done or has not done its job. And I think that the deep frustration of many theorists of democracy, political philosophers, political scientists, etc., is that this process seems to have gone wrong. I'd like to remind you of, I was among the naive people who thought that globalization, and particularly the internet, was going to boost democracy in a very deep way. I try not to live according to the principle of don't confuse me with the facts. I've made up my mind. And I would like to remind you of a very important concept that Cass Sunstein, a legal scholar who was also Obama's communication consultant in the cabinet for quite some time, has described what he calls the echo chamber effect. The echo chamber effect is basically that what has happened is that the absolute majority of people in democracies only read/see/hear news channels, media that they agree with to begin with, and that reinforce their views. The idea of democracy as an agora, as a space in which there is deliberation and discussion, and again, true deliberation, has in reality collapsed. Oh, that's lovely. I always like when I have background music. The idea of the agora has collapsed into a conception of the media in which media are not even pretending any. I don't need that much music. In which basically what citizens seem to look for is just to pump up their own sense that they're right by hearing from other people again and again what they want to hear to begin with and what they think to begin with. I will come up at the end with a totally illusory. Who asked the question? What can be done practically? Before I will suggest something that I believe is probably going to be completely useless, except if people like you, constitutional scholars, will actually figure out whether it can be done, yes or no. Now, let me start with one of the ways in which the agora, the public space, has completely disintegrated. There are, to put it very simply, three non-communicating groups in democratic structures. The one, if you allow me a terrible term, is the simple citizens. Just, people who live their lives and they happen to be in democracies, and once in a while they go and vote, but who are mostly don't have the luxury that people like most of those who sit here, by the very fact that they do sit here, show that they have the time and the resources to think about political processes more deeply. Most people don't have that. A second group is, and you've mentioned that in your lecture, the growing importance of very powerful interest groups in whose influence on the democratic process is mostly below the radar of most of the political discourse, and hence we miss out on much of what is really going on. As you know, for example, in the United States, the current estimate is that just in Washington, D.C., $3.6 billion a year are being spent on lobbying groups that are actually there. We're not even talking about the rest of what's going on, and we should forget that the United States is a federative structure, so that means that, of course, there are many other places in which they are there. And then there is a third group. I tend to call them the new cosmopolitans. They are mostly people with advanced academic degrees. They are, which is very important, speaking English. We sit here in Jerusalem, but this conference is taking place in English, and it doesn't matter whether I speak at the Aspen Institute in Berlin, whether I speak in Vienna or in Dresden. If it's a conference that has if I'm not just speaking, giving a single lecture where I'm invited, among other things, because I'm German speaking, of course it is in English. It is a group that, as we know from sociological studies, a new one has just come out from the Pew Institute, people who are overwhelmingly liberal in orientation. It's very interesting that worldwide, when you go to academia, in the social sciences and in the humanities, the estimate is roughly that 91% of the people have basically liberal orientations. And this, as I said, I call them new cosmopolitans in a number of publications. Academic institutions, think tanks, NGOs have strongly universalist values, very much believe in the power of deliberation, and if you allow me to say we, because again, the fact when people sit in this room, they like to be part of this group. We make a hell of a lot of noise, and we have amazingly little actual influence. And the question is, what on earth has happened? Why is the practice of democracy becoming so different from its theory? And I would like to just give you 3 little examples. 2 hours after the attacks on the offices of Charlie Hebdo in January 7th, 2015, Marine Le Pen went in front of the cameras and said that that France had to reintroduce the death penalty for terrorists. Now, Marine Le Pen, you can say a lot of things about her. She's not stupid. She knows as well as anybody in this room that people who basically go on a suicide mission are not going to be deterred by the death penalty. Which means basically that she knowingly did what populist politics does best. Use crisis in order to mobilize the basic emotions. And as I said before, love is a little bit difficult because, how many people do you really love? But it's very easy to mobilize hate. A second very, very, very is of course the phenomenal success of our beloved Donald Trump. As you know, there are a number of fact-check organizations in the United States. Current estimates are that of his factual claims, anywhere that depends a little bit on the site that you talk about, that you look at. The estimates are that between 90 and 96% of his factual claims are false. So at least what we can say is that even though there is a little bit of distribution in terms of how much it is utterly amazing that all agree that more than 90% of what he says is false. And the man, de facto, has clinched the Republican nomination. So I would say that one of the many, you've mentioned many more, one of the, how much time do you still have? 10 minutes, okay. One of the major dangers that democracy faces today, and Donald Trump, I think, is a fabulous example for that. Among other things, because he has something that no other candidate in the United States has, which is an enormous amount of television experience. As you know, he had a very, very successful reality show. And what we are ending up with is that politics instead, liberal democratic politics, instead of being a space of deliberation, is becoming a reality show. And again, I can tell you in the number of times that I have participated in practical politics, trying to help people. I did it because I tried to help people who I thought should be elected to get elected. I was fabulously unsuccessful, but I learned a lot. I really saw the extent to which it is a reality show. As you know, reality shows are basically about getting people to love and hate the participants. It doesn't matter whether it's Big Brother or whether it's Britain's Got Talent, American Idol, Kochav Nolad, whatever. What we want, what the viewers want, they want to be moved. They want to be able to hate, and they want to be able to love. And basically, what we're seeing is that if I define populism as the attempt to undermine the deliberative process by working exclusively through pushing the right buttons in terms of emotions, I think this is one of the major reasons why we see worldwide, as Benjamin Barber has shown quite impressively in his last two books, where there is such an enormous distrust of most citizens in our political institutions. Now, can we do something about that? The answer is probably no, but I'm still going to say something that I'd like. I want to start with a lovely little invention of the Washington Post that you may know. They have a fact-check division, and they have what they call the Pinocchio system. You remember the story of Pinocchio, that whenever you lie, your nose gets longer? So what they do is they check what politicians say, and depending on how false what they say is, they get between 1 and 4 Pinocchios, and if you're really, 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 really rude to the facts, you get 5. It's an incredibly successful system. As you can imagine, Donald Trump holds the absolute record in the terms of in terms of the numbers of Pinocchios ever got, and it doesn't do anything at all. And since I am sitting near one of the most distinguished constitutional legal scholars, not only in Israel, but I think in the world, I wonder whether you will like the following idea. You see, we have certain basic rules where truth and falseness are actually matter legally. It so happens that in a court of law, at least we try to truth, is elusive, but we try to get to a point where our judgments are evidence-based. The press, one of the most important tools in a democratic system, is supposed to base its claims on actual evidence. As I said, it's supposed. The pressure is mounting. I have 5 minutes, but I'll make it through. And at least in theory, at least when the media harm somebody or attack somebody, they can be held accountable in a court of law if they have disregarded evidence, at least evidence that was available in principle when attacking somebody in public and harming his name. One of the things that I wonder about is, would it be possible if, first and foremost, of course, legal scholars, but, you know, political philosophers, political scientists, etc., would it be possible to come up with a system that would make it possible to hold politicians accountable for what they say, at least if you can show that they have willfully ignored available evidence about the facts? And again, I'm coming back to Donald Trump and say something, if a political system works in a way that a man who is known to lie non-stop can, you know, in the Republic, we hardly remember it, but in the 1950s, the Republican Party was a really serious party with people with deep thought, with one of the best presidents the United States ever had, Dwight Eisenhower, who managed to prevent the Cold War from spilling over into an absolute catastrophe. And look what we're at now. So, since I don't know how my proposal can be put into something practicable, and I need the help of people I think we all need a process of thinking where we can change something in the basic rules of democracy. Because, and I'm going to end here so you won't have to show me another one of the yellow pads. I think there are very good reasons why people are so skeptical of democracy. I think there are very good reasons why, according to Benjamin Barber's data, an average of 18 to 20% believe that worldwide in liberal democracies, believe that democracy still works. Because, again, if democracy has turned into a reality show, and again, I can tell you that it always, when I was in actual campaigning, it took me about 2 weeks to overcome my intellectual and moral misgivings about becoming a manipulative pusher of buttons instead of working with arguments, because I understood that otherwise we wouldn't get anywhere. Then, of course, something is deeply wrong. And my suggestion and my question is, can we come up with a system of legal ground rules that would restore the idea of the agora of a deliberative space instead of a reality show where we just push emotional buttons? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And moving on quickly to a discussion, I want to point out that we have heard in the first lecture that there are two versions of democratic theory. One is the procedural, the thin one, the processes, and the other is the substance, the values, civil rights, separation of powers, rule of law. And here we heard that the crux of democracy is deliberation, but deliberation is not procedural. Procedural is the result of the buttons. So the distinction between campaigning, what do I do to get elected, and governing, what do I do when I am in power, is a very critical element of democracy. And I think one of the problems with democracy is not that we are not getting the right people elected because of problems with campaigning. I think there is a serious problem with what people who are elected do when they are governing. So I would like us to think about these issues more deeply. And Gabi and then Yaron. And
Carlo, I have a real problem there.
Wait for the mic. We want to hear you.
Is there a mic?
You can't speak without a fax.
All right, I can do it fine without the mic. Look, the problem is this, that people, it'd be nice if you control facts, but that's a minor problem. The problem is that politicians make unfalsifiable statements. For instance, suppose I ran a party that is based on the idea of opposition to the international Jewish conspiracy. Now, any fact that I will bring up to show that there is no international Jewish conspiracy will be taken as one more sign that there is an international Jewish conspiracy. For instance, in America, but in America, for instance, right now, there's the hidden hand of finance argument. The finance millionaires on Wall Street are responsible for everything that happens. This is another version of the same thing. They may be responsible for a lot of what happens, maybe more than the Jews in the world, but they're not responsible for everything that happens. I think politics, campaigning, what Ruth called campaigning, is very often making such appeals to the hidden hand of blank. And the hidden hand of blank exists across a large variety of positions that you can have, and I think that's part of democracy. It can't be fought that way. It is how you have to train people. That's why I said in my opening remark about education, you have to train people to look for hidden hand arguments and to say what kind of basis or unbasis there is for them, because if Trump is elected, then he is also a member of the finance elite. It can go, it's endless what you can do, up to there.
Yaron?
I think, Gabi, you're right. Clarity in political speech before election is a form of political suicide, Carlos. And the problem is not false or lying, is that politicians discover that the best way to speak on 10 sides of their mouth is to be ambiguous. Now, I must say I'm tired of the litany of complaints about democracy. It reminds me of what I hear from time to time. It's not my experience. When people say, marriage is not what I thought it is. I think it's a very important thing to recognize that, Carlo, your idea of democracy is not even an idea of political theorists. It is something completely remote from the history of political thought and the history of political practice. But you have experience, valuable experience, but I'm not sure it is generalizable. For example, distrust, according to contemporary political theorists, distrust is a measure, is a necessary measure, a feature of democratic political culture. A democratic political culture cannot be sustained when everybody trusts the government. So there is an issue of the relations between distrust and the amount of trust in what you trust, what you don't trust, and accountability. What do you need accountability if you have trust? It's ridiculous. So I don't think it is a sophisticated characterization of the situation. Now, what is important to understand, I will try to speak very briefly about it sometimes at the end of the day, but that there is a collapse of the civic epistemology of liberal democracy. It's a matter of at least 100 or 100 years. It is a gradual process. The concept of fact no longer plays a role in the sense. There are many books. There is, for example, a book by a woman by the name of Elaine Puvy. The question is the history of the modern fact. Facts are not the same thing that over the years. Epistemological, political epistemology, civic epistemology, social public opinion, all is changing in history. You cannot assume that you can go to the Agora by the fiat of a legislative solution approach. I think this is ridiculous. Now, I would also say that it didn't start with Trump, although it's a very popular thing to call. You assume that nobody likes Trump in this country or in Europe. Well, I think it didn't start with Reagan, but Reagan is a much better and more complex example. And the reason is very simple. He cultivated the concept of Star War, which was not fact, it was not approved by scientists, it was completely false from beginning to end. Yet, it had a fantastic political consequences in influencing the balance of power between the United States and Russia. What do you do with this? I end with one sentence by one of the person I most admire. Unfortunately, he was neither a Jew, not living. And this is Giambattista Vico. He said, believable impossibilities play a more important role in history of politics than unbelievable truths.
Am I supposed to answer at some point? Or?
Yes, we're taking a few and then we're answering all of them. There, please. I'm sorry, we are only going to take 4, and after you is this gentleman here, and that's it.
Can you give the names of the persons?
Yes, please. Everyone who talks, please give your name.
Professor Evelyn Goodman-Tao. Yes, I enjoyed your talk, but I would like to talk also about basic values. I think if we don't talk about basic values, and my teacher, your teacher, Kvod Ha'adam V'Cheruto, the honor of man and his freedom. So if we say that democracy, the basis of democracy is free choice, then you explained that free choice is blurred by all kinds of other things. So, but I would like to say something of a solution. I think the question is not of true and false. The question is of good and not good. And then the question is, for whom is this good? We are in a contextual, I think, question about democracy. If we just take the example of the EU, Western Europe, and I'm a lot in Europe, as many of you know, Western Europe wanted a monetary union. Central and Eastern Europe wanted a political social union. And the two problems of Europe which were not solved were nationalism, we see this now with Russia, and religion, we see it with Turkey. That is why I would like to say, and I've spoken about this and written about this, we are seeking a model between a secular democracy, and I don't know what secular is, it's a transition between traditional model, and a fundamentalist theocracy. This is a challenge for people who talk about democracy. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. This gentleman here is could you please give the mic there?
My name is Howard Rosen. I'm an economist. I actually have a question. It seems to me that the response to your idea is technocrats. Professor Schaefer, from my impression, I may be oversensitive, seemed to degrade them. So could the two of you please have a conversation?
Okay.
Wait a second. I'll give you another one just for...
Another one? I don't remember already what's...
maybe you will...
I didn't write it down. Okay, anyway.
Well, here you go. You have a few seconds to remember all the questions. And I want to add one question to you in terms of people, sources of inspiration. I think that we realized in the first lecture that we do have a serious challenge, and the things that we were talking about here, about hate and love rather than deliberation, are very important, but the symptoms for a deeper truth. And I want us to all to recall one of the, I think, major philosophers of governing, and this is Mr. Machiavelli. Machiavelli is not a great democrat, but if you read Machiavelli very carefully, he's a very perceptive political and psychological scientist in the sense that he talks seriously and systematically about what a governor has to do in order to keep his republic strong, robust, and thriving. And there are a lot of elements of what we call responsiveness. He's not accountable. This is not sheer populism in order to be elected, but it's something that needs to take carefully the basic interests and sensitivities of the people so that your government is stable, and when you need your people to fight for you or to take efforts for you, they will do it for you because you raise them to be proud and patriotic about their society. My suspicion is that what we have in our modern West is a weakening of the balance between natural patriotism, natural community, and human rights and demands from the state. We want accountability, we want the state to do things for us. When it doesn't do these things for us, we are disenchanted. We don't have a sense of our responsibility and participation. I think this is something that is deep in our culture that went wrong, and it goes back to nationalism and religion and all these things that build on communities rather than on individuals and human rights. Now, if I'm right, part of the frustration that we see with Trump and others is about results. There are problems. It's not discourse and it's not truth. It's about the very simple question of, do we have enough food to eat? Do we have security? Do we have identity? And if we don't, what is the good of government? Why do we give you all these powers if you fail in giving us what we need best, which is life, security, property, basic welfare? Now, these are not discourses. These are not love and hate. These are real facts on the ground that people want. And if you give it to them, they will usually support you, either in a democracy or in any other kind of regime. I would like us to have our leaders not necessarily telling the truth all the time. I also think that the real test for a politician shouldn't be that they are law-abiding. Law-abiding is a minimum. What we need are people who really work for us. And then the sense of who are the us, who is the demos, globalization, who is the demos? Just individuals or some kind of community, social community, political community? These are the questions we need to tackle. Please.
Please. Okay. I would like you all to relax. It will take me about 3 days to answer.
You have 5 minutes.
Yaron, I of course, I am completely aware about how unrealistic my proposal is, exactly because I have the experience. What I'm trying to do is something fairly simple. And that also relates to your question, and in a sense to Gavi's. Look, we have in a number of fields, we have fairly decent standards of accountability. And in a recent book of mine that was published meanwhile only in European languages, I don't want to publish it here because they're going to kill me, I propose something that I call the physician's test. It's very fascinating that people who are completely willing to shred the facts. Let's start with the Jewish Orthodox position that women are not fit to be witnesses, ki nashim kalot da'aten. Because they are, how would you translate that? Because they're frivolous, yes. Okay? Now, we have a hell of a lot of research that shows that that is wrong. The Catholic Church, under the previous two popes, refused to say that in AIDS-stricken parts of Africa, condoms should be and are allowed to be used. And Cardinal Trujillo, who that was under Benedict, said that in any case condoms don't stop AIDS because the virus is smaller than the texture of the condom, something that we absolutely know to be false. Okay? Now, those very same people, when they go to a doctor, and the doctor says, look, I have very deep convictions about how this should be treated, and I don't believe that I should take into account the state-of-the-art research. Those very same people, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, Catholics, will not say, oh, how wonderful. He's a man with a real conviction. They would go to court, they would sue for damages, and they would make sure that the doctor would lose his license. So there are a number of fields where democracies have found ways where taking into account evidence, excellent evidence, and it's quite interesting how much consensus you can get in many cases about what does or does not constitute evidence. My question is, what would happen if we would apply this idea of the physician's test to the political domain? Now, Gabi is, of course, completely right that 90-odd% of what politicians say is not falsifiable to begin with, but 10% is. And you see, I think, and I'm saying this as somebody who, in one of my hats as a psychoanalyst, I have been studying human nature for all of my adult life, and I am frankly not a great optimist about human nature. Okay? And for me, the tension is the following. The tension is, if you're a realist about human nature, and yet I'm kind of an old-fashioned believer in basic Enlightenment values, is there a way in which we can at least shift a little bit what is going on in democratic discourse? Because, you see, we have built a system in which a politician who doesn't promise the absolutely impossible becomes inelectable. In other words, we've created a system, and Yaron, I'm not decrying democracy. I'm trying to see whether we can make it into something that's slightly closer to the basic ideas that, even though you may not have liked what I see, I think we shared the basic ideals about what it should in principle be. And to try to somehow connect between a very realistic and pessimistic view about human nature and the idealized model of deliberative space that has been around for 2,500 years, and at least as an idea, is remarkably resilient. My question is, what can we do to somehow connect between the two? I'm saying this with full awareness that chances of doing so are very slim. But sometimes, if you just shift a little bit, if you just make sure that the threat that if you speak blatant falsehood, you are accountable for it, as you are if you're an engineer, a physician, or anybody else who is supposed to base what he says, he or she, of course, say on available evidence. The question is whether there is something we can do to restore this basic idea.
I think we should all thank Professor Strenger for a very inspiring suggestion about how to cure the ills of democracy. And we will be back here after a short coffee break. I would like to suggest that if we want to structure our discussion of democracy a bit better, I think democracy would say that it's not the best or the perfect regime, but it is the best we can think of. And I think what we need to
wasn't that the guy with the cigar who said that? And not Bibi,
yes,
not Bibi.
He was quoting someone else, but yes, he did. And I think we need seriously to think about, is democracy successful in delivering the least worst possible regime we can have? And we need to look at the things we would like from an ideal regime and compare them with other forms of regime, and maybe then we can A, recapture our faith in democracy, but also B, identify where we can do what you are suggesting, cure some of the major problems that we have in democratic structures. Thank you, and we'll meet here.